Hi, everyone, and welcome to Elevate Your Life on Dr. T TV. I'm Dr. T, and this is the place where emotionally sensitive people get a voice and also get the emotional tools that they need to succeed. Here with me today is Eric Christansen, who is a writer, producer, and director. And I'm going to read a little bit of Eric's bio here. So, Eric Christensen is an acclaimed documentarian who has built his brand around socially responsible filmmaking that educates, inspires, and heals. A 7-time Southwestern Region Emmy Award recipient, he has the ability to identify an issue within a specific population and have it resonate with a general audience through compelling storytelling. The New York Times has called his work strikingly photographed and sure to give comfort and support to countless veterans and their families. Christensen's last film, Searching for Home, Coming Back from the War, has aired over 2,300 times on PBS stations across the country. As a trauma survivor himself, having lost his home in the Santa Barbara Painted Cave fire disaster, Eric understands trauma, the resilience of the human spirit, and how important hope is to the healing journey. Searching for Home, Christensen's films Faces in the Fire, Homecoming, a Vietnam vet's journey, and Searching for Home, Coming Back from the War have migrated from the entertainment arena into the clinical environments at top mental health institutions to help the recovery process for thousands of people whose lives have been compromised mentally, spiritually, and physically by trauma. By spotlighting survivors and their journeys, Christensen has unified audiences around the power of hope and continues to educate the general population about the complexities of trauma. Christensen's work has been seen on major networks, including Discovery, TLC, PBS, and MTV. He has also produced an IMAX film. Eric, welcome to the show. It's great to have you with us.
Oh, it's great to be here, Dr. T. Thank you. And I look forward to it. And our little chit chat before,
No.
and a connection already going. And so
Love it.
this is great. I'm excited.
Well, Eric, I want to start by saying that you are a hero to me, and I just am really getting to know you. And that's because somebody who decides to really highlight the journey of recovery and bring that to the world is something so powerful and special to me, because as someone who does what I do, I'm getting to witness, I'm facilitating and witnessing, people rising from the ashes and coming into new levels of capacity. And for somebody in the world to be documenting that recovery process rather than having it be in the shadows is really, really profoundly important. So I wanted to share that with you. Do you recognize that heroism in your own self?
I hope so.
Yeah.
Because the filmmaking itself is always I don't want to say a struggle. It's a joyful struggle. The type of storytelling I do that's based mainly on recovery and hope, it's not necessarily what you would call mainstream.
Right.
Mainstream is a little bit more sensationalized, a little bit more, dramatic, I guess, although my stories are very dramatic. But it's interesting what you said, the rising from the ashes, and this is my calling. It's more than just filmmaking for me. And I think today is the 30th. Is that right?
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, 3 days ago was the 30th anniversary of the Painted Cave fire disaster. And that's really what started me on this whole journey of making grief recovery or trauma recovery related films. I was a working editor at the time, and when the fire came 30 years ago, it took my home and all my worldly possessions, and it took me kind of 7 months to get my stuff together. And at the time, I was a practicing alcoholic and used a lot of drugs. And at the end of that 7 months, God's calling card was I had a second chance. Everything was all gone. Everything was white clean. The slate was clean. I got clean and sober January 13th, 1991. And I was already working on this kind of project called Faces in the Fire about the recovery after that fire, because I was fascinated with the other survivors, because we could speak to each other about the fire experience, but trying to speak to the public outside of that, there was a big gap to try to relate our experience. And so that was where I started working on Faces in the Fire, which became my first film, and I guess what you would call my calling. And now I'm working on my fourth film.
It's amazing because why, in our company, Dr. Tracy Inc., and what we do, I really relate to what you're saying, because emotionally sensitive people who tend to, whether it's an event trauma that gets created in their life or they experience, or whether they just go through life experiencing things much more emotionally as other people and much more intensely. The reality is that emotionally sensitive people, or people who have gotten so sensitive from trauma, they do feel like they're alone, and yet there is this world that they experience and share, and there's something really powerful about just like claiming that as a reality, that now there's something to do with that, and grow together, and the fact that it brings a bond of people, it brings people into such a bonded state through something really painful, is also this amazing creation that's going on. And it's just amazing how you were able to like recognize that it wasn't just these awful things that happen, and it wasn't just that these people are struggling like me, but that there's really something powerful to create out of all of this, and not everybody can recognize those moments.
It's interesting because there's two gifts that came out of the fire. Is one of the gifts is obviously the introduction to my calling and making these films. The other gift was, it was really my first connection with my gift of empathy. And so not only did it spur me on to get clean and sober, but it also put me into what I would say a population of other people that I became very sensitive to, and I was able to use my gift of empathy and connect with them, and then turn that into a film.
Yeah.
And it's funny because I didn't know about my gift of empathy anything until I was diagnosed basically with with the gift of empathy about 6 or 7 years back. And then I'm like, oh, that explains so much. I don't even like to call it sensitivity. It is, but
it's an awareness, right?
It's a gift of empathy, and being an empath. I don't read voices or read minds, but I can connect on a emotional level, and I read emotions, and if the vibration and the sense of place that I get with the people I work with, it's a huge gift, then turned into my films.
Yeah, well, and this is what I want everybody to really continue to keep in mind, right? Is that this is a tremendous gift. It is while a lot of people can experience it as a burden because they feel so much, and empathy at times can feel so painful, and having so much of it there, and yet there's something about really coming into a connection with it, and the power of what it is and what it does, and growing more in the capability of trusting that you're supposed to express it.
I think there's a whole nother show in just my journey of learning how to manage it and then use it as a tool. It's like anything else. There's so many things that were received in our life or happened to us in our life that seem like a tragedy, that seem like a burden. But in the bigger scheme of things, and through your higher power, or whatever you choose to call it, it's a gift if you look around it and then start to learn about it, and then use it. And that's been my path with empathy, and being having the gift of empathy, is that it's been a learning journey now on how to use it and how to really leverage it in my work.
Exactly.
Before, I was kind of a slave to it, and things would happen around me.
Yeah.
And in my first, well, it was halfway through Searching for Home, coming back from war, that I really realized, and I was, quote, diagnosed as an empath. And then I was able to start to use it as a tool and understand it. And I have a whole system I use now that keeps me a little bit more mentally healthy and autonomous with my own emotions,
Right.
without having to constantly be a slave to the other side of that.
Eric, this is brilliant. I love how you put this about being a slave, right? About this concept. I really want to have everybody just know that is so. I know that our audience can really identify with what you're saying, Eric, that the difference between these emotions controlling you and you being able to use how powerful they are, right? And to be an architect with them in a way that, this is a way that I think about it, rather than, as you're saying, that something's like happening to you and that you're sort of a prisoner to it. And that's really something very, very powerful, because also in our society, there's this way that it's sort of like, if you can feel more and if you've got big feelings about things, that can be uncomfortable for other people, which is why there's so many challenges for people to accept who they are and be who they are and recover from things that are traumatic in their life. And it really is such a amazing thing to utilize all of what is being given to you in this gift. And so what are some of the things that you have seen that you have been able to do in your life, including these films, and tell us more about them from having this connection to your empathetic self?
Well, one thing I'd love to go back to is a little bit of my technique of how I think it overall really helped the audience. But the one thing, how empathy and how my sensitivity, I guess, I'm not crazy about that.
Okay.
Works in my work is that we create a space for our participants. I'm very, very careful about the people that I choose to have on my crew, that they have the right, not only mindset, but the right energy, the right focus, and just be proper around our subjects. But it's not only that, but that sometimes people will absorb and redirect energy in different ways. And so I'm very aware of that. And so I'm very careful about who we pick going into these situations, so we can create this, basically, it's a sacred space that we come into with some of these participants, or all of them, because they all have been through severe trauma in different ways, but they're also humans. It doesn't matter what the trauma is, but they're also humans, and I tell the people that I work with, that the transparency to these individuals that we're working with, to the people that we're working with, the participants, for lack of a better word, is such a cold word, but our transparency and our connection with them comes first. Then the film is secondary. And by putting the film secondary in that way, then we've just served the amazing connections and the interviews and the stories that we're able to receive as a gift from these people is amazing. So my gift is creating that space, literally, and holding that space for the people, and not only listening, but creating an open environment where they can share unjudged and not have me lead them any way other than to be kind of a guide through their experiences. Wow. And it becomes, I start surfing with them. It's so, every time I come into an interview, I'm like, oh gosh, is it going to happen? Is it going to happen? Right? And we sit down and, there's people I've actually interviewed so many times and worked with through the years that end up appearing in my films again and again. And each time I'm like, wow, is this going to happen? Or with a new interviewee, with participant, is this going to happen? I sit down, I pray, I create that space. I flush myself and connect. And then, I ask the first two questions and I'm like, oh my gosh, in the back of my head, this little voice is like, it's happening. And I surf with them. It's literally, I surf the thoughts, and it's like this. It's not me telling asking the questions and trying to push them into a way. To me, that's more like what a filmmaker would do. I'm more a messenger. And what I do is I allow a space where we surf together, and then we connect, and I fully absorb and transparent to their experience. And then that's where it leaves me very much open as an empath or a sensitive person to like the detriment of taking on other people's emotions and carrying that connection far away from that interview later. And then it's the tools that I've learned to, I don't want to say sever that bond, but I can disconnect from that or connect from it at will now.
To be intentional about what you're doing, not just continuing to react to an experience or something like that, it sounds like.
And I found myself during searching for home, coming back from more of the very first part of working on that film, being still connected to my subjects, coming home from a shoot and literally waking up in the middle of the night in terrors and things like that. And my wife is like, what's wrong? And so I started talking to Dr. Jeremy Crosby, one of our consultants. He's a clinician in Wichita that specializes in PTSD. And it's a form of secondary PTSD. And that's when he really talked to me, diagnosed me as an empath, and then started to give me tools to deal with.
This all makes so much sense, Eric, because being people who have really sensitive instrumentation, which I feel like this is very on purpose. This is what's supposed to be happening in the world, where certain people can really sense what's going on and other people have other gifts and they might be oblivious to certain layers of emotional content. And without being able to be in the other layers of emotional content besides what somebody's saying and even their affect, but being able to really be a sensitive instrument for that experience there and be able to know what to do from there. It's so important, because otherwise I feel like so many people they attempt healing processes, and there's so many well-intended therapeutic practitioners and modalities. And yet there is just a whole set of layers that, as I see it, as like, I feel like I'm an emotional scientist, and you're really feeling so much more of what is going on that is there. And I can just see how important it is what you do, because you're able to feel things that the person is not aware of as well. And wherever then that guides you to guide them, I can just imagine, again, why your films come out so well and are so impactful to people.
It's interesting because I love listening to your word choices, and I get real excited when I'm talking to a clinician and somebody that's
a fellow empath.
And they start to, because the vernacular is so important. And it's like, I hear you mentioning emotional content, and emotional content versus emotional being is like the core of my, my modality or my system, or whatever you want to call it, of how I function and able to separate, my own emotional autonomy versus when I'm connected and working with the people, because my emotional being is mine and I'm affected by certain things in a certain way. But I often say the emotional content that I'm exposed to and I'm connecting with, be it like even, in a psychic way or in a physical, like more, conscious way, versus that, I can take that emotional content on and fold it into my emotional being. And then that's where I get mixed up, because
Yeah.
then I'm having somebody else's emotions. I'm starting to operate through their emotional content, which I
Exactly.
say, and I get it mixed up with my own emotional being. I can be upset about certain things. When somebody dies that's close to me, I'm going to grieve and have that emotion, and that's my emotional being. But when somebody else does that, that's to me emotional content. When they're telling me about losing their best friend in Vietnam or whatever it is, but I can connect. And when I'm not in a healthy place, I guess, before I learned all this, I would take that content in, and I would almost believe it was mine.
Yeah. Which is
And
how,
it would, and
yeah.
that wall would, or that wall would break down, and there'd be a big gray area between my own emotional being and my own emotional and their emotional content, I guess you would say. And the biggest thing for me was being able to separate those two and then function and be able to call that back, though, as emotional content when I'm editing and when I'm working, so I can get back in their space and understand how they fit in with everybody else that I'm telling the story about.
Well,
And I can
Eric,
get more to that kind of technique if we're ready for it.
yeah, well, Eric, as you're talking, I feel like, we are obviously two different beings, but we're really of a similar paradigm where, as I facilitate, people's emotional development and expanding their emotional capacity and helping them heal and strengthen and integrate their experiences and again utilize them. People who are psychologists often get asked, isn't that so difficult? And you take everything home, and it's the reality is, just like what you described, that's just a really big part of what I do and what we teach sensitive beings who can pick up on everything without meaning to or knowing that they are, to really be able to have such a connection with themselves that they keep monitoring, so that they keep retaining the connection with themselves. And then you want to understand something about somebody, the beauty of our ability to be able to put our attention into someone else's experience, but then, as you say, pull it back and be completely in your own being, and have that be so intentional and strategic so that you don't end up becoming enmeshed again with others or emotional content that would drive things in your life that is not what you're trying to do. And I think it's really important that we're talking about this, because so many people don't really understand this aspect of being a person and how important it is. And I think that reason people are getting traumatized all day, every day from just hanging out with people and not realizing what's going on.
Oh, yeah, completely. And I have a smile on my face because I love talking about this side of my work. Because say if this discussion starts at a film festival, there's like maybe 5 people in a room of 100 that are going to go, whoa. Then the rest are like, this guy, he could be like a swami, or they get into this like whole like, well, I'm sorry, but
me too. This happens to me.
This is a part of my workflow.
Yeah, it is.
I mean, this side of the realm of your brain, that the subconscious and the psychic is a working part, and my connection with my higher power, which I call God, is a working part of my work constantly.
Yeah.
I mean, I allow it in, and I know it's happening.
Well, and this is why I love doing this show, because I really want to highlight the deepest, most empathic, sensitive instrumentation, people that are in the world, because it's so fascinating and it's so interesting. And to also be the people sort of that, because on the flip side, things for us could be so painful, right, as empaths, that it sort of ends up through, I think, what I kind of call everyday trauma, in addition to event trauma and stuff like that, and all the dysfunction that we can experience and be around, to be in the midst of. We are the people that end up sort of needing to figure this all out, right? Because
Uh,
otherwise it's like, I'm going to sit in suffering, or I'm going to figure out how does this instrumentation work and how do I get to have it do all the amazing things it can do in the midst of being with people. Otherwise, it's sort of like your empath job is to go isolate yourself, right? And that's no fun for anybody.
and I believe, right now, especially, there's certain people, and particularly empaths and people that are really called right now.
Oh, yeah.
There's a big calling right now for us to, I don't want to say rise up. It's not a demonstration. It's not going on the street corner. It's
Yep.
like as simple as a phone call.
Yeah.
And I feel very compelled to tell this real quick story about,
Yeah.
it just, I lost my home in the Painted Cave fire. And I remember after I finished Homecoming, a Vietnam vet's journey, I'd gotten good friends with one of the Vietnam veterans, Bob Trimble. And he was a Purple Heart, Silver Star vet. And I mean, my boys ended up calling him Uncle Bob. We got very close. And I was living just north of Los Angeles during the fires, and I was watching all the fire coverage. This is quite a few years back. And I remember that night going to bed, and then in the middle of the night, I woke up and I smelled smoke, jumped out of bed, and I kept saying, "Oh my F,
Yeah.
the house is on fire, the house is on fire." And I run down the hallway and I realized, and I even saw the smoke, and I realized the house wasn't on fire. My wife is like, "What's wrong? What's wrong?" She knows, me very well, obviously. And that next day I call up Bob and I go, "You're not going to believe this episode I had." And he goes, "God just gave you a touch of what it's like to have a full-on traumatic flashback."
Yeah.
He goes, "And just one thing, maybe don't watch all the fire coverage." He goes, "I don't watch firefights before I go to bed." And so that was like this entree into like the understanding of my more deeper understanding of my subjects and my friends and my participants in my film work. But, when God gives you insights like that, they're for a reason. Going back to this calling, it's turning these things into a positive thing and finding what your place is and how you can turn these experiences that you've had into helping others and being positive, so.
Right. Being productive with them, because, how I see things is that we're all powerful creators, and we're creating all the time, whether we take ownership of that or not. And so with whatever the material is, right? Whatever the materials that we are given, and what, this sense of what to do with all of this, because it can be reshaped and reorganized into anything, and something, incredibly beautiful like your films. And in anticipation of getting to collaborate with you today, Eric, I was really thinking about my relationship to trauma, and the fact that, first and foremost, I recognize that as a psychologist and somebody who identifies as an emotional scientist, who really can see all the layers and really looks at the truest, deepest layers in order to support people, and somebody that, like all humans, having gone through different aspects of trauma, and also being a sensitive person my whole life and feeling deeply, things have been pretty intense along the way until I, like you, started to have a methodology for myself that really helped me maintain a connection with myself, and go on to really build an incredible life for myself and this incredible work that I do. And I don't think I ever really identified so much with trauma as I have in recent months, where my dad passed away last August, and he was somebody that was, if just to be 100% transparent, I loved him more than I've ever loved anybody. And I feel like the more I've studied it, I feel like it's because I felt like he needed more love than anybody, and that's probably why that was the case. And in our relationship, my dad was he was a very empathic person, but he struggled with it his whole life. Didn't acknowledge it, was just really having a difficult time. And so even though he'd built this amazing life And you might refer to this as like the mask, right? Like he'd built this amazing life. At the age of 50, he melted down, just really he imploded. And one of the things that he did was to go to a very extreme religious community that had him change his entire whole life upside down, like overnight, which is, even if that's where the direction you want to go, that's a very traumatic thing to do, to like, just like, if you think about the fire and all your worldly possessions were gone, this is the kind of thing that they had him do, is to just disown his previous life. And so it was traumatic to him. It was traumatic to our family because it was such a paradigm shift. And so we'd already been in 17 years of like, did this really happen? That he's just now in this community, and we're not really his family anymore. So when he died, and this group did not allow us to be a part of his funeral process, to be a part of his death process, which is a very that's something you're really conditioned for. It was really surprising and shocking, Eric. And I think out of everything, I don't think I ever was conceptually ready for there to be this, like, your dad is dead and there is no more to the story. You will have nothing. You won't go through his things. And I started to recognize, especially as a conscious person, I'm like, this is starting to create a serious traumatic set of stuff going on beyond just that my dad passed away, which is an adjustment in and of itself. Yeah. So there's a process where I found myself, like, I'm sure, you understand this, in many ways trying to kind of reject this and go, no, 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 no. Like, kind of wanting to just deny this and going, no, 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 no. This is way too extreme. I don't have the handbook for, like, I can't have my dad's ashes or a baseball card from his baseball card. Like, this was so extreme. And to your friend's point about the flashback, I thought to myself, Tracy, here comes the curriculum on trauma and grief, and you are going to learn what humans go through on the deepest levels, and you are going to make, something very, very beautiful out of this. But it's going to be by going right into it, right? By not running from it and not letting the shame and all of that stuff and the resistance of it take me over. And Eric, I gotta say, as weird as it is to acknowledge this, a traumatic experience with the more grief than I ever knew a person could ever. I didn't know people could feel this level of pain. By being able to be with it at a certain level of intentionality, it like has brought about the most beautiful growth in myself as a person, even though I still am quite fragile from it, to this moment that we're on this interview. And so I thought to myself, wow, what an opportunity to get to talk to somebody like you that is with people all the time who are facing things that are so serious and so life altering, and what that process is to truly come back from that and be stronger and be whoever you're going to be next.
And that that's beautiful. And it's just, for both of us, how do we signal somebody that's in the middle of that and tell them, keep pushing, because there's a beauty on the other side of it.
Oh yeah.
And and that's why I continually tell my story about the fire. That's why I continually tell my story about my recovery, because if my work is based on hope, and it's like, I felt you when you're talking about that, and the denial that happens. Denial isn't even a word, because it becomes very real, that you're like, that didn't happen. I remember even, after the fire, I'm like, I'm going to find all my stuff somewhere. I was convinced I was going to find myself. And it's interesting. This is part of Dr. Shear's work in complicated grief. Complicated grief, people get very stuck in that place, believing the person that died is going to come back. It's like, or they're going to find their stuff again.
They're going to wake up.
And it's just, But, how do we communicate to the people and anybody listening to this that, on the other side of that intense grief, if you just hang on to your butt,
Yeah.
in
Strap in.
Jurassic Park, hang on to your butt. It's like, if you just hang on, that, I mean, for me and my belief, God has something on the other side for us, and it
Wow.
just, but it's not only that, but it opens up what I would say, it opens up constant new fields of what I would almost call ministry.
It does.
Because what I'm hearing you say is right now, talking to a lot of the people and a lot of the emergency workers, a lot of the clinicians in New York, there is a crisis in grief because of all the people that have passed away from COVID.
Right.
Their families weren't able to see them. It's a very similar.
Eric, I see how this.
Like what you were talking about, they couldn't go see them. They could get their stuff and everything, and here's what's really frightening is a lot of the nurses that normally have a buffer zone because of the families coming and taking care of the dying individual. There's no buffer zone. Those nurses are taking them on. Those nurses have to clear their stuff out after they've passed and try to navigate that void. But not only that, but going back to the crisis, there's all these families that haven't been able to connect correctly to grieve because it's a stunted grieving process.
Yeah. So Eric,
I mean, wait, hold on.
As people,
I can't have a baseball card.
Yeah.
I mean, memories and
I can't have a transitional object.
So it's like, so where are you going to go? I mean, now I'm becoming.
Yeah, great, Eric.
On the anniversary of his death.
Yeah.
It's like, what are you going to, all these things are so meaningful in grief, milestones, anniversaries, any sort of customs that you had with them or rituals that you had, all this stuff becomes very important. And if you're left with nothing, it's very hard to get past that grief. But that's another belief that I have is we are wired to get past it.
We are.
It stimulates as part of us, but we need all these tools in order for it to become part of us. We need a baseball card.
We do. We do. Yeah. We
man. And then you take that time, have your tea, look at the card, process, and then, okay. So
well, and Eric, I mean, as two people who are really living in the purpose and being messengers of God and following that, right? And what I call living inside the purpose, right? It's not optional for me. It's not like if this doesn't work out, I'm going to do something else. Really living in it. It's like, of course I could see, as I'm sure you have in your journey, where you're like, I'm doing all of this, and literally this other moment is happening where you go, this is all an orchestration, because now every article somebody wants me to write in the media is all about grieving without the typical customs and, the importance of condolence cards and all. And I'm thinking, it couldn't be more perfect, because I've been able to be a participant and a student. And because of the way that I have a relationship with myself, and really invite everyone else to have a relationship with yourself as the learner and as the student, as the scientist, as the person that's being and feeling it. I remember at a certain point going, Eric, this is either going to completely shut down my lungs, because that's what was happening, right? The heartbreak level was like, oh boy, I did not get what this word meant. Okay, ouch. This is really a breathing issue now. And I remember just this amazing awareness going, what's my intention here? And my intention was, to move through it, not to go around it, not to get stuck in it, and to use it and to explore it. And I thought, this exploration is as important as anything in the human journey. And so every layer of it, talk about the rage and anger piece, which I'd never allowed myself to explore to the depth that I did. It was this incredible, I thought, I really, quite honestly, it's funny, it's no accident that you're here. I thought somebody should be filming this, because I am sitting with the anger piece, and it is telling me everything about human anger and why people murder people. You know, like I'm getting a lot of data on understanding how do people end up on Dateline NBC because they killed somebody, and all of the vast human emotions that people really struggle to kind of face and explore to the depth so we can be really artful with them and how we work with them in our life. And so it's fascinating, you know, that you profile people going through the range of emotions in the recovery process. I'm just fascinated by it.
Well, it's interesting because what I was thinking when you were talking about that, and talking about the stunted part of it, the stunted grief, and either some people completely block it off and it doesn't even start,
Yeah.
and it's not acknowledged, or it is happening, but there's people that live up here and it's happening here.
Yeah.
And so it's this duality that doesn't, but they don't even know that anger and things are going on because it's coming up in other ways.
Yeah.
Yeah. And things like that. And it just, and it's interesting, all the time that I worked with all these different people, and a lot of them have become really good friends, that I can sit down, and in the first little while I have with them, I can usually, and it's my gift of empathy in a way, I can usually understand like where they are in that path, and the most beautiful thing, on a positive, are the people that have walked through what you're saying, and they've like walked through instead of around, and there's just this clarity and this kind of beautifulness of it, like, the Bible says it's just, how the silversmith constantly has to forge the silver to get it to be pure, because it has to go through the furnace.
It's a purification process for sure. Yeah.
And so when I come across those people in my work, they usually become the staple of the film because they have been through it.
Yeah.
And then, it's just such an honor to be around that, because that is my hero.
Yeah.
That is my hero. That's my hero in the world of recovery. The guys that have a lot of time, that have been through it no matter what, and they stay clean and sober. It's my hero in, Bob Trimble passed away 4 or 5 years ago, but he was one of my great heroes because not only did he fight in Vietnam valiantly, and he got the Purple Heart and Silver Star and everything, but then he came home, he fought the PTSD, and he fought his alcoholism too. I mean, and then he died sober, and he died helping another veteran. That's how he passed away. Wow. He was delivering a POW MIA bracelet in his plane. And anyways, that's a whole nother story. Those are my heroes, because you're talking about being heroic, and those really are my heroes. The guys that fight that and then help others.
Well, that leads me to ask you, Eric, so that everybody can really understand it so thoroughly, why it's so important for people to watch your movies about these recoveries and these people. And will you say more about that? Why that's so important?
Well, there's two sides to viewing my films, in an amazingly simplified way. Is one, for the viewer that's not necessarily connected to the trauma, and the general public, it creates more than a soundbite. It's not just the crazy veteran. It's not just, they become humans. And these stories that they tell, and the hurt and what they're going through, and then seeing the healing and the hope on the other side of it, people can connect with that and become aware of other people's plights, especially with my new film, Unmasking Hope. We have a lot of different kinds of traumas, not just the military trauma, but it's an awareness of the people not necessarily connected with that trauma, but it's an awareness that produces empathy. And so that viewer then, when they see the homeless veteran, or when they see or they hear the 9/11 survivor 18 years later going, man, I am still struggling, that they don't say, just get over it. It's 18 years ago, that they understand it's more than a soundbite. There's a human being behind it. So that awareness builds an empathy. So we have tolerance. And so it's like, oh, okay. And that applies to practically anything that we went through. So it's this awareness, empathy, and tolerance on one side. That's one side. The other side is the people that are connected with the trauma. So, I mean, on a super basic level, it's the soldier that sits down to watch my film Homecoming: A Vietnam Vet's Journey. It's about a motorcycle run, and I had vets tell me this all the time. Oh, I'm going to watch motorcycles, and they're like, oh, look, the motorcycle run and everything. The second part of what viewers experience from watching my films is the people that are connected to the trauma, and in a very simple way. Say, for example, with Homecoming: A Vietnam Vet's Journey, it's about a motorcycle run that goes from California to the Wall in Washington, D.C., but it really is a healing pilgrimage. So a lot of these veterans will tune into this to watch the motorcycles, and then they start to hear their story. And these guys are telling their stories about what happened in Vietnam, why they're on this motorcycle run, why it took 30 years to finally realize that something was different. And these viewers, then, these veterans, other veterans, will make a connection with this. And then all of a sudden they're like, oh, me too. And it becomes, I'm not alone, and it's a point of identification. And that's the start of all healing, I believe. And it was for me with my drugs and alcohol. Until I found a bunch of other druggies and alcoholics that are like clean and sober, I couldn't have stayed clean and sober. But it's very similar with the veterans and anybody that like the sexual abuse survivor. They hear their story and then they go, oh, me too. I'm not alone. I'm not crazy. And so they identify, and then that's the secondary, function of my films. Is my films, we try to put outreach and engagement in place and community resources. So they know what to do after seeing the films. With Searching for Home, Coming Back from War, we worked with the Veterans Administration on the subset. We had 877 War Vets, which is a 24/7 hotline, veteran to veteran. Then for families, we had Coaching into Care, so a family could call and say, hey, and they explain how to work with your veteran. So it's very important then at that point of identification on watching the film that they have some sort of resources to go to. And so that's totally key. But those are the two different things. It's that awareness, empathy, and then tolerance for the viewer. And then for the individual that might have went through that trauma, it's the identification, oh, me too, I'm just like that. And those guys are healing. What can I do? So those are the two different things I hope people take away from my films.
Well, this is it's so incredible and so important. And I feel just like in the work that we do, because, Eric, my sense is this is a therapeutic modality, right, that you're doing. Obviously, this is a therapeutic process, right? If we think of what the therapy is to treat and heal something, right, through some type of strategy, and even being brother and sister in this work, in helping people heal and knowing that other people are doing such important things and coming at it from different angles and illuminating it, because the thing that I've known my whole life since I was a little one, and I recognize, like, I'm really able to I'm able to be aware of a lot, but I knew I didn't have a lot of power. I just knew that whatever the emotional struggles that my family was in, I thought, this isn't really the person, right? This is something that's happening to them. But I could really see the difference between who the person was and what the emotional, turmoil was. And so I've always had this sense of, it was this inquiry for a long time and confusion, sort of like, okay, people are suffering and they're struggling. Family members are in, husbands and wives and aunts and uncles. And people are like yelling at each other and fighting with each other. And so many family systems are just in so much emotional turmoil all the time. And these are people that love each other. These are the people that are supposed to have each other's back. And this is supposed to be your tribe, so that in case I, kind of go off the reservation, you've got my back and you're helping me see things clearly. And so it's always been, it continues to be really interesting to me and sometimes frustrating. But I'm full of hope about it, that people will continue to grow in more willingness to look at the depth of the human experience on the deepest emotional levels in themselves and in other people, because all of life's beauty is there, and all of the connectability is there, the connectivity is there. And I find, I know that we share this, and where we want people to feel that they can look at themselves and look at others, because there's so much running away from what is available there,
It's this is great. I just, I was flashing on when you're talking about that, the emotional depth and the family unit and everything. I have 3 kids, and they're not kids anymore. My baby girl's 18. Then I have 2 boys, one's 20 and one's 22. And it's interesting to see the different depths that they have emotionally, and they don't like to listen to my podcast, so I can probably openly say this. Yeah. My daughter is very advanced emotionally.
Yep,
and if they heard me say that, they'd be like, my boys would be like,
I so get it though. Yeah.
It's interesting because she can go to certain places and depths, but she also has, I jokingly, I finally told her, I go, honey, you got the shining, because, she is an empath just like her dad. And she's very aware of the spiritual world and everything.
Oh, yeah.
But it's interesting looking at in my own family, how, and how different sets or like different tools that they have and emotional depth. But here's the one thing, and it just kind of is a left turn that I just want to say is, like, in raising kids. Do you have kids?
I have stepkids. So
in raising the kids is that you have to accept that a lot of times they don't have the context yet. They haven't learned. So I'm looking at a 21-year-old male hoping, wishing he had the ability to do this, but he doesn't have the context or the ability yet, because it's learned, to function in a certain way and take in certain emotions and process.
Oh, yeah.
So I'm like, okay, I got to just accept that. And it's really hard because but it's even with the 5-year-olds. I mean, anyways, I'm getting in my whole parenting theories, but just so many times they do not have the experience and the context. And we have to remember that and try to present it to them in a way that's palatable and educational and not degrading. But anyways, I went off in a whole different direction.
Eric, we will probably have another interview then, because this is like so important in my life's purpose, and just I feel it's a paradigm shift to having there be standard emotional education for people from the time they are very little, to literally get what's going on with them as a person, and how their whole emotional system works and relational system works and stuff like that. Because otherwise, right, we end up learning it through the suffering, and then it's like, oh, now we've cemented a bunch of coping strategies that may or may not be adaptive, and now we're trying to what we say is replace those with ones that will be very productive and all of that. And I was thinking of this past weekend, because you know how it is to just keep having all these insights, and I just thought, for people to be able to heal and recover and grow, it's ridiculous to say that it's important, because it's so far beyond that. Because everybody is, especially children, but everybody is depending, you say, if you take the children piece, children are depending on their parents to be emotionally competent and help them learn how to do that, and nobody gets that training. And so to have that be, it's so important that, and also each of us in relationship, we need each other to be emotionally competent, so that you're, like you said, you're the being of you and I can be the being of me. And which is why I'm so excited the way that things are shifting, and you're a part of this, that entertainment meets mental health is just such an amazing paradigm shift that's happening. And you've been doing that for a really long time. And so I'm really excited to keep seeing what's unfolding.
Yeah, we keep pushing the ball uphill, or the stone.
Yeah.
And it's interesting because we've been, my current project has been at some of the top agencies in LA, and and the thing they love to say is, where's the hook? And
I know that question. Yeah.
It's still not like mainstream, this idea of healing and hope. It's still not like what most people would want to turn on, and it's a bit of a frustration, but it goes back to when I went to California Institute of the Arts, which I proudly wear my alma mater. We call ourselves the Cal Arts Mafia back in the 80s. But it goes back to what one of my teachers said, that, don't try to be the flavor of the day. Don't chase all the fads. Be who you are. And then one day you will become, but she never put a time frame on it.
You just made me feel so good, Eric, because, my vision that comes through me, is really that all humans will make their emotional development a priority, that like they proudly claim, right? That this is just a part of life, and that this is what we do to grow emotionally. And so that ideally that we don't have to recover from things that we don't damage ourselves in anymore, because we can be so conscious and intentional.
Yeah.
And that's the future that, that we can all look forward to. And so that's what really excites me. So I now feel very excited about becoming a fad someday. And that emotional training and development, either as a reaction to something that you want to heal, or as a welcome everybody in the absolute developmental, preventative, proactive version of it. Right. And so that damage isn't a paradigm that we continue to instill in ourselves and each other. And so I'm so excited to have everybody to watch your movie that's out, which is the current one right now, is Unmasking Hope, correct?
Yeah, Unmasking Hope will be out hopefully, and we're finishing it up right now.
Okay.
And we're working on the finishing funds right now. We're in the red zone. If anybody's interested in donating or actually finding anything out about the film, it's unmaskinghopethemovie.com.
Okay.
And we are working under the International Documentary Association fiscal sponsorship program. So we have a 501c3 umbrella. But we're looking for the funding to finish it, and but we are, as I say, in the red zone, finishing my fourth film, and it should be done. We're hoping to get it out before 9/11/2021.
Okay, so, got it. And is there, and also in terms of people being able to keep up with you and really watch your other movies and track what you're doing, is there anywhere else you want them to go? Any other website?
Yeah, that would be www. I guess you don't have to say that anymore. EC Productions, like Eric Christansen, ecproductions.com. It has all my stuff on there. So,
EC Productions. Okay, and now that
it'll have this podcast on there as soon as it comes out.
Well, and now that we've spent some time together, really unmasking hope, which is what I really feel like. The last thing I want to ask you about, Eric, is this question that I do on this show that really checks in with people about, if this were, even though this might sound a little morbid, if this were the last moment where you could be giving a message to the world, and that they would take forward with them the rest of their lives, and they'd know, Eric taught me that, or it just become a part of their psyche. What would that message be, that contribution that you're here to make, that really important message to people?
It comes down to one word, is empathy. And I really think it's that simple. It's the ability, and it's the practice of being able to take the time to put yourself in somebody else's shoes. There's a big difference between sympathy and empathy. Yeah. Empathy is understanding. Empathy is like understanding their emotions. It's a whole different bag, but empathy, I would say, is the key. And through that understanding, then we can make sensible decisions on things. Wow. Instead of knee-jerk, like one sentence blurbs, the perfect little sound bites. Yeah. I think that empathy and empathy, you take a chance because you're opening yourself up to understanding somebody else and having perhaps some of their emotions. And that's why I think it's not too widespread in a certain way, because it is a risk. Yeah. I mean, from face-to-face empathy to empathy to somebody across the world and trying to understand what their point of view is, and one of the most powerful things that I ever heard that really opened me up was in the very beginning of when I was shooting Homecoming: A Vietnam Vet's Journey. I was trying to figure out my connection with the Vietnam veterans that we were at a MIA ceremony where they have the table set that's empty and they ring the bell and they go through this whole ceremony.
Oh my gosh.
When they said this was somebody's father, this was somebody's son, this was somebody's friend. Wow. Yeah. Just run that by yourself. When you see that guy on the street corner that's mumbling to himself, that's somebody's son. Could be somebody's father. Could have been somebody's friend or is somebody's friend. They're just like us, and that's, that's the start of empathy. So I go back to empathy.
I love that, Eric. You're making me think of my dad's mom, who, whenever we would see somebody like that, she would say, that was somebody's baby once.
Yeah.
Yeah. And so on that note, Eric, that is so beautiful. And I just thank you for this collaboration, and such a privilege and joy. And I just want to invite all of you to just receive what Eric and I have shared with you today and just put it into your life and do whatever feels intuitive for you to elevate your life with it. We really appreciate you being with us today. Take care. We'll see you soon.
Thank you.